Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our second panel this morning, which is sponsored by Darktrace. So we're going to look at culture as a threat mitigator in cybersecurity, and very specifically the leadership role of the board in that regard. And to help us, we have Malcolm Norman, Wood Group CISO, and well known to many around here. Malcolm, it has to be said, did serve in the British Army, and there will be a theme here. But he now, I think, may be almost unique amongst our panelists in that he actually represents an operator. We have distinguished people on the panel from government, from law enforcement, from institutions, and from cybersecurity companies. Maybe that Malcolm is the only one with that operator's perspective, and I think that'll be very valuable. Amanda Finch is the CEO of the Chartered Institute of Information Security. Many of you may be members. What caught me about her job description was assisting all sectors in raising levels of competency and education. But I think she'll also have a really interesting perspective on culture from a diversity perspective. One of her key responsibilities, diversity, inclusion, and professional standards. And if she looks at the panelists next to her, well, let me go on to Marcus Fowler. Marcus was a US Marine Corps officer. He then spent 15 years in the Central Intelligence Agency, and he's now the CEO of a relatively new departure for Darktrace, Darktrace Federal. So he can bring an enormous breadth of experience on the US government's approach to cybersecurity. And this session is moderated by Richard Preece, Chief Training Officer of OSP Cyber Academy. Richard served in the British Army and indeed has spent a career dealing with training from both the individual and collective perspective in both the public and private sectors, and he now spends much of his time focusing on educating boards in cybersecurity. Richard?
What we're going to do is try and look at this from a strategy perspective and why culture and why cybersecurity is so important. So we're going to follow three basic themes. Basically, what's going on here and why culture is so important. How you create a sort of guiding way of developing your cyber resilience culture. And then finally, how do you pull it all together? And throughout that, we will very much be asking an open question, and I'll be asking for sort of the points and a few war stories from the panel. But along the way, I will be asking you if you want to ask any particular questions as we go into that. And I would just like to pick up on the first point to this, and it's really picking up a comment Greg made in his opening points, and one of the comments that came from the last session. And that's really, why is this important? What is going on here? Well, digitization is just a fact of life, as Sandeep made clear. It's going to happen. So what we need to think about is, what does that mean for our business strategy, but also the culture of the organizations going forward. And as we move into an exponential era where our adversaries are thinking like that, we also need to move much more exponentially and much more proactively anticipating, not just reacting to some of the challenges. So with that, what I would like to do is just start off with what's keeping you up at night.
Well, there's a lot of things, and I think for me, it's hard not to start at the geopolitical. I know we have a fantastic panel later going into national security, but the implications, the cyber dependency that companies have, that governments have, that is so prolific and fragile, right? And we mentioned, I think, in the last panel, closing, making sure the front door is locked as a just general. But we have to remember that these networks and these environments have thousands of doors, right, and windows and all sorts of things, and the complexity of their environment. So the impact that a cyber event can have really is hard to gauge, whether it remains in one company across multiple companies, takes down, an industry, takes down the East Coast, as we've kind of were talking about the Colonial Pipeline, is probably a wake-up and scary event of the impact of what an IT-generated cyber attack can do to an OT, heavy company and industry, and the ripples that it had across the U.S. and across, I think, the oil and gas industry more broadly. So for me, it's a lot of really, and I think Chris Inglis put this well. I think he made a good statement. I'll tweak it. He said, well, when dealing with the ransomware threat and the impact to small, medium business, multiple industries, even critical infrastructure, he said, well, we're not out of the woods yet. I take point with that in that we don't know how big the woods are yet to even know what direction we're heading, right? Just because it really, Cyrus did a great comment around just the size of the ransomware problem, the size of the attackers and the impact they can have. I truly don't believe we understand the scale of the problem, but we are, I think, as organizations, coming to terms with the level of prioritization we have to give cyber and cybersecurity. And I think boards have really come a long way in terms of how versatile and how dynamic they are in terms of thinking how we're resourcing that.
Thanks, Marcus. Amanda?
I'm coming from a different perspective. I'm worried about having enough people to support Marcus in dealing with the threats. We have the skill shortage, and we just need to get more and more people into this business. So what keeps me awake is really looking at how do we do that? How do we attract people to our profession? I'm the only one on the panel that hasn't been in the military. I'd like to have a gun and have a go, but I don't know if anybody would dare let me have a Kalashnikov because I've got a short fuse. We need to look wider in terms of how we cast the net. I hate to say it, but we're a bit male, pale, and stale here today, and we need to break that. We need to make the industry more attractive. When we looked at our survey this year, it wasn't necessarily technical skills that people were looking for. The shortage of skills was really analytical and problem solving, closely followed by communication. Now, those are skills that are wider than the technical area. So what I'd like to throw out to you is to look wider in terms of the recruitment that you have into your teams. Look at people working in the business, because one of the core things is about communicating with the business. If you're taking people from the business, you can train them up to be risk advisors or other functions. You can take people from different technical areas and train them up. So that's what's keeping me awake, is attracting people. And it's attracting people from school age. So it's how do we make this career a lot more attractive to people. I actually think if you got up in front of a bunch of kids and said, do you want a job where you can be really well paid? You're never going to be out of work, and it's always going to be interesting. You'd have a few takers, certainly from their parents, if nothing else, because it gets them off their hands. So we need to think about that. We need to think about how we make it more attractive to women, so that eventually I have to queue for the loo. That's my aim in life, is that we get more diversity into the industry.
So I think we've just got our first cybersecurity metric: ladies queuing for the loo. Conferences. That's really good. I think we're going to come back to the whole skills piece and skills of people working with the machines who use artificial intelligence, such as Marcus's company use, and how you pull that together. But let's go to the operator, and who's got the weight of the world on him.
So, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much indeed for coming along. I think, actually, to answer that question, I would like to involve yourselves. So, could you all stand up, please? So, if your organization has been hit by a cyber attack and you know about it, could you sit down, please? If your organization has been hit by a cyber attack and you've done something about it, can you sit down, please? If you or one of your family members has been hit by a cyber attack or a hack, please sit down. So I would suggest that's probably a ridiculously small number. This is the concern that I have. Guys, thank you very much indeed for sitting down. It's the scale. It is the scale of the bad actor against the white hats. I describe my job as walking up a down escalator. If I stand still, I will end in a bloody mess at the bottom of the escalator. If I take one step at a time, I will stand still. That escalator is increasing in speed. My organization blocks 1.7 billion attacks against our perimeter every quarter. 1.7 billion. My security operations team deals with around 2,500 incidents of varying scale each quarter. The scale of the challenge that we face is enormous. And it's actually overwhelming. And so it's how do we operate within partnerships, within organization, the organizational structure of suppliers, of clients, of regulators to combat that scale that we face.
Thanks, Malcolm. And that was really quite sobering set of statistics. I can see Marcus is desperate.
Well, I do wonder if the 80-10 standing, if you said, now you have been hit with a cyber attack, but you don't know about it.
So you're right, you're brilliant. So thank you for the tee up. So General Graham actually allowed me to quote Sun Tzu by starting off. There is a quote that says, if you know the enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, you will lose as much as you win. If you don't know your enemy and you don't know yourself, stand by for defeat. My point being that, many congratulations for the people that were standing, but you may not know that you've been hacked. You may not know that your details are now surfing the dark web. And that, to me, is the challenge at a personal level and certainly at a corporate level.
I think for so many, so the know yourself versus know your enemy and kind of breaking out 50%, I think much like in some other areas than traditional military thinking, in cyber, it is so much more important to know yourself because that's what's much more knowable than the landscape of what is attackers, right? You have the vigilante, the individual, the 20 plus year old who was successful. You have nation states, you have hacktivists, you have hobbyists, you have so many. I think the cyber approach of I must know the enemy is very flawed because they're going to be incredibly hard to predict, incredibly hard to come at. I was an intelligence officer. I'm not saying threat intel is bad, but threat intel as your core defensive indicator or awareness is really going to be constantly playing catch up, right? So it's great for context. It's great for prioritization. It's kind of cool when you know it's the Iranians that did it, but it isn't going to help you in terms of defending, when you're already after the fact.
Yeah, and the threat is asymmetric, isn't it? The bad guys have got to be good once. We've got to be good every single time, and that's the challenge. But I think from a skills perspective, it starts to then bring a different approach to the selection of people, other than it's all about techies.
Oh, absolutely, and I think that's something that we talk about a lot, which is know yourself, but also know others in your team. And I think when you're building teams as CISOs, you've got to take a cold, hard look at what your strengths and weaknesses are so that you build a team that can actually support you. So, for example, when I was a CISO, I'm not mega techie. So I had to make sure I had a really good technical team behind me that I could actually communicate on behalf of. So it is really important about understanding your skills and how you complement those in a team, and that you build yourself a really strong team that's made up of different components. And the breadth of,
and the breadth of roles that team has, right? I mean, it isn't just every cybersecurity person is only going to do this element of the overall cybersecurity or the SOC job or whatever, right? Where the investigative or the analytic is core to the incident response and some of those things, where you have the patching and the help desk, and those are going to be more technical. The landscape of technical acumen, right, is to your exact point, very broad, right? And being able to bring in cognitive diversity of background skills is so important to strengthening the team. Malcolm, I actually had a question for you. I'm filling in the moderator role for a second. I apologize. When you think about bringing people on, junior versus senior, what I've observed from the outside in is actually getting junior people to, and the right passion, uplifting them into being valuable, enabled, and more senior fairly quickly is actually something, hopefully companies like Darktrace are leaning into, because that should be part of our role too, allow you to hire from wherever by making the application, the use, the investigation as accessible as possible, junior through senior, to advanced threat hunting. But I think, as you look at your hires, how are you balancing all of that?
So there's a brilliant question about, where does it start? And actually it should start at schools. How do you generate that interest amongst the 7-year-old? In order that they understand and can be part of that defensive network within the environments that we work, but secondly to spark that enthusiasm and that passion. We work with RGU and provide a number of placements with RGU students. And Chris and I were talking about this last week. The reality is that those placement students are getting what? They're getting experience. What am I getting? I'm getting that adrenaline injection of individuals who are massively motivated to join, and they're spreading that across the wider team. I still think that, and I look at my team, and it is still very male dominated. We're probably less our graduates, and less a number of military interns that we provide as well. Plus of 35.
So can I just partly challenge something that you said, Marcus, and build on this? So I think we're in the world of a team of teams, and we need to understand ourselves. And what I find working with a lot of organizations is, if you ask people to say, do you really understand all your connections, dependencies, who does what, where the key person risk, where the key technologies are, the technology supply chain? They can't answer. They just can't answer. And nor would you expect them to be able to. So we've got to accept uncertainty, complexity. We've got to, and we're in a world where we need to actually have teams that are coming at the problem from different perspectives. That includes threat intelligence. But what it really requires, and this plays to Sandit's point, it's not just the bad, mad, or sad. We now need curious people. And Amanda, I wonder how, in your work and experience, diverse teams has helped generate that curiosity.
Oh, definitely. I think being curious is probably one of the prerequisites for being a security person. If you're not curious, you're never going to prod things and say, what can't it do? I know what it can do, but what can't it do?
So my immediate question is, in an interview, how would you identify curiosity?
The difficulty that we have is, number one, the job specs that we put out for to hire individuals, where actually what we often, I'm not just talking about Wood, but I'm talking about the wider organisations, is we want an absolute rock star. We want them to play the drums, play the double bass, and sing at the same time. When actually what we're wanting is somebody to come in and do a fairly standard job within the security operations centre. Okay, fine, but what do we really want? And it comes back to this idea of how do, in a normal interview, find somebody. So one of the things that Andrew Tom, who's my business information security manager, now does is he gives them a problem. He gives them a cyber challenge to solve, and it's how they manage and work through that.
And that actually works well for people that are on a spectrum as well, because they tend not to interview that well because they find it quite confrontational. So giving somebody a problem like that is a great way of understanding and seeing the reasoning. But what we've seen with some of the consultancy firms is that they deliberately recruit a diverse range of people. So you'll have somebody that's got an ICT background, but you'll also have a music student, somebody who's done geography, whatever, basically. And it's interesting. You mix it up. They all bring different things from their various degrees, but it shakes the whole thing up. And they work really well together. Sometimes the geography student finds out that they're actually really technical because it was the geography teacher at school that was the nice guy and they wanted to learn from him, whereas the guy who was doing technology wasn't as interesting. So people come into the profession from different areas. They realise that they have skills that they didn't know that they had beforehand. So shaking it up is good, definitely.
And I think we're talking about engaging the board. So perhaps one of the questions should be from the board to the to the CISO or whoever's reporting in is, talk to me about diversity. Talk to me about the diversity of thought. Because I guarantee you, if they all come from the military, guess what? You'll have a particular train of thought and a particular approach to doing things, which is not necessarily the right way all the time. So question number one from a board to a CISO, interesting about the number of attacks you had, interesting about the speed to close those. What about the diversity of thought within your organization? How do you develop it and how do you ensure that you've got more of a disruptive and disagreement, and then through that use of diversity?
So I feel a question to the audience. Who's ever considered cybersecurity as a diversity issue? A few? Based on what we've just been discussing, who now thinks cybersecurity is a diversity issue? A few more. I think we need to work harder on this.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I do wonder if it is, especially at the board level, if they are. There's so many problems associated with how they're thinking about their cyber risk. Diversity is kind of not lost, but is also like, first I need to figure out how susceptible, what's my vulnerability level look like, and then I can figure out and ask the right question. I mean, I think what we are seeing is more questions around cyber teams, how they're run, cyber vulnerabilities, how they're exploited. I mean, Malcolm, I would bet if something hits the news, Uber, any of these, they turn to you and go, how would that have done to us, right? I mean, you end up having to kind of answer the hack of the day and how you would have done.
So do you know what? 10 years ago, cyber was not, perhaps not 5 years ago, 10 years ago, cyber was most definitely not an issue that was discussed at the board. Now, our board is very, very well informed around the cyber issues. They will not only know Uber has been hacked, they'll talk about the hack, and they will ask me the question of comparatively how where do we sit. And I think we've talked about this idea of education and awareness. I think the vast majority of larger organizations now will have at least one individual on the board who's got responsibility for technology and indeed, therefore, cybersecurity. There was a study done by Gartner just recently that said that of the top 250 FTSE companies, 1 in 10 now have a cyber board, as in the equivalent of an audit board. And they say that by 2025, 4 in 10 will have a specific board committee to focus on cyber. So I think at the board level, the message of understanding and awareness is significantly shifted. I think the really interesting piece is, as a CISO, what about those other levels? So we talk about this step from the server room to the boardroom. If we go in that lift from the basement where often the cybersecurity team are sat, the first level is, what about the other technologists? Have we actually won the hearts and minds of the other technologists for them to understand that actually cyber should be built into the solutions, that cyber is not a war between convenience and security. You then get on to the next level, and this is the team of teams, Richard, that you were talking about. What about legal? What about DPO? What about communications? What about the business units? The challenge for me is not selling the importance of cybersecurity to the board. It's actually selling the importance of cybersecurity to the business units. How can I enable them to win business? And I'll give you a quick example. Saudi Aramco, biggest company in the world and one of our biggest clients, continually smashed by Iran. And as a result, are quite rightly concerned about their supply chain, about their third parties. And so they have initiated a cyber due diligence program that says even before you can bid for work, you need to be able to prove your security. And if you are lucky enough to win the project, then we are going to do an even deeper analysis. And we're going to actually penetration test you. We're going to test your cyber incident capability. The point that I'm making is that the ability for me to say to my business units, you need to be able to prove, or we need to be able to prove this in order to do business, changes the dialogue. It starts to talk about how cybersecurity can be used to win and retain. And so this idea of the third parties and cascading it down actually improves the overall resilience of the organization. I enjoy that dialogue with my clients, or with our clients.
So I think there's a really interesting point. We discussed this the other day when we were talking about this panel, about actually a lot of this boils down to trust. It's can an individual, can the board, can the organization prove it's credible, it's competent, and it means what it says. It's authentic. And this comes back to, do you have that culture that really supports that the necessary open dialogue between teams and within teams about the reality of the situation? Marcus, I don't know whether you've any insights from your side.
Well, I think one is, and we talked a little bit about the CISO role and having trust in the board, with the board, and that's built over time, that the first time something does happen, you're not seeing the door, right? And the level of stress there, right? And then we talk about CISO turnover rate is something like 2.5 years or something insane. And how do you build that up and how do you do that? I think it's also with the business units so critical for you to be able to, that they trust in you, that when you're asking them to do something that is maybe disruptive to their business operations in the moment, but you've built up enough emotional, political capital to say, no, we need to do this because, I know why, or we've had the discussion, right? Some of it is also explaining, right? Trust isn't given, right? It's earned, and it's usually just earned through engagement, through bringing them into part of the conversation. I think that's the other thing. Security, it's also trusting in them that they don't bring you in at the last minute when they're saying, we're going to do this new business operations, go make it secure. Well, you've missed like 10 steps, and this is going to look highly disruptive of you because you didn't bring me in the room at the beginning so I could shape it as it went and therefore not be disruptive but still be secure, and it's doing it. So I think it is engagement, it's consensus building, it is, not being the men and women that sit in the basement that just send emails or try and spearfish you, and then you get yelled at because you clicked on the link and they're the reason you're in your boss's office or something like that. So I think it is a collaborative thing. And I do think, much like the board's been educated, there's interest, in the business units about what's happening in cyber. Are we protected, right? They've seen brand damage, they've seen jobs lost, they've seen impact. So now they almost want to ask you questions as well. Hey, in the lunch line or whatever, would Uber have been, the whole Uber thing, are we good there? How are we thinking about that?
Yeah, and so let's look at perhaps the second question that the board should be asking. What's the number of clients that are demanding that you prove your cybersecurity credentials? Because that's then the sort of dialogue that enables you to talk about the why. And previously, the reason that security would not have been in those discussions at the beginning was probably because we would say no. And that's how many security, handful of actual security professionals. Okay, how many times have you heard, and it's nodding of heads is the response, you are the technology organization who say no. 10 times out of 10, the people having conversations. I mean, that's the challenge, isn't it? How do we break that dialogue? Well, we break it by engagement and using that coffee break opportunity to get a 10-minute conversation and an hour's conversation beyond that. There is a perception that we've got to change. And that's within our remit as CISOs.
Definitely, and I think it's very much building those relationships, as Marcus said, before the wheel comes off, basically, so that you can demonstrate to them that you understand their problems. So we always hear this thing about speaking the right language to the board, to the financial director, he understands money, and so on and so forth. But it's actually understanding other people's problems, and all business is built on relationships. We all actually like doing business with people that we like and get on with. So the more that you can build those relationships with different parts of the business, understand their problems, walk a mile in their moccasins and all of those sort of things, the better, basically. And then they're going to listen to you. And I think it's about saying no in a different way, is that sometimes you need to lead people with yeah, we could do that. But hang on, let's just work through this. I mean, that's what I tended to do when I was in that position, is to sort of say, right, okay, let's look at what it is that you want to do and why you want to do it that way, and see if we can do it that way, because that's your preferred choice. And then get them to understand why maybe it's not such a good idea to do it that way, and come round to your way of thinking. And then they say no rather than you.
Sorry. That brings us to a really good cultural issue. It's how do you communicate and foster a culture of effectively, this will happen at some stage, it's a when, not if, and get people comfortable with that, and have that supporting just culture that people will be free to speak up and actually proactively speak up when they've had that near miss of the phishing email, and they'll do something about it. Marcus?
Yeah, so it's been interesting. So I've had a number of companies actually invite us in as a solution they use to brief business leaders on why they feel confident. They want to learn more about how is Darktrace identifying anomalies? How is it helping me with highly social engineered spear phishing? So they almost, have you actually seen them where they had like the UI, so our user interface, showing it from a kind of the current threat SOC view in their lobby, right? Where they were to be able to see like, okay, what's the technology that's helping us? And I think some of it also is, and this is some of that culture that you can build, is how you are trying to leverage technology and the solutions to take some of the, not blame, but responsibility for the security out of the user's hands, right? If you think about spear phishing these days and the level of social engineering, I mean, I think it's unfair to the employee if you think they're a robust line of security and not clicking on something, right? They're just too good right now. These are the human, and we laughed about this in the room. So my best friends are humans. Increasingly, they're dogs instead of humans, but they are flawed, and they should not be left to stand at attention or not, depending on the military background, because they clicked on something that was in their tone. It was from a known, business partner. It was, it was a hijack. It was highly spearphished. It really is unfair, I think. So that they know you're augmenting their actions with technology around them, with a team that cares about the business. You start to really breed kind of thinking about security in a more approachable manner, and one that they're part of, rather than, get the hammer thrown down on.
No, absolutely.
They've got to be able to feel comfortable in coming and telling you. I mean, I always sort of say the thing is that I can only manage what I know about. If you don't tell me, then I can't help you manage it. And I think if you've got that level of trust there, and I think the other thing is that it's definitely the when, not if thing. So what we need to do is that we need to prepare people so that it's doing exercises with them so that it's not sort of like, wow, this has happened, is that they're actually more familiar with, okay, we did that as a tabletop exercise. How do we think about it now? This is the person that I need to talk to. This is what I need to do, blah, 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 blah. So it takes some of the mystery and the fear away from it.
And it's that culture of challenge.
Yeah.
The red team, the purple team, to the people who say, this is secure, this is safe. It will never happen. Well, actually, there's always a way. There is always a way.
So I describe this as left of the boom and right of the boom. So the boom is the incident. And coming from a military background, if you get a casualty from the battlefield to the operating table in an hour, they'll survive. It's now minutes. And Marcus will tell me even more, it's probably less than minutes, with the cybersecurity incident. So we've got a boom event. It is all the stuff that the organization has done to the left of the boom in preparation for that. Team of teams. If the first time that your organization, your incident management organization, sits down on a Sunday morning to say, how are we going to deal with this, then you'll have failed because you're introducing each other to each other. If, however, you've practiced and rehearsed and people know what their roles and responsibilities are, they know that they could potentially get that call, and they've got that muscle memory of going through the exercise and have thought through, number one question, do we even consider paying a ransom? If we are thinking about that during an incident, an event, we're already way behind the right of the boom, where we've got to act in a very structured, ordered, and organized way. Greater time needs to be spent on the left of the boom. This idea of culture. So I know that the awareness around cybersecurity of our 40,000 colleagues across the group has improved. I know that because the metrics from my silent fish tell me that. I know that there is a greater understanding of the cybersecurity threats that the organization sits on. I know that there are individuals who will come to my team to ask for support with clients. And that's all good stuff. But we still get a relatively large number of clickers on our silent fish. We still get a large number of incidents, 67% last month, driven by social engineering and phishing. So the behavior has not mirrored the awareness and understanding. And the oil and gas industry has got some great examples of nudging behavior. I was not in the oil and gas industry until 5-6 years ago, and I was surprised by three things. First of all, you start every meeting with a safety moment. Well, we now use those moments for cybersecurity moments. People put lids on their coffee and hold the handrails. So what are the equivalents from a cybersecurity perspective, and how do we nudge people towards using them as the guardrails of how we ensure that we begin to drive this muscle memory around the cybersecurity do's and don'ts. And the final piece of this is, do we celebrate the clickers who then get 5 minutes of security training punishment, or do we celebrate those individuals who've actually posted the silent fish to our security operations centre through the button that we've provided them? It should be the latter.
Our audience warning, questions coming up to you, but Marcus wants to say something.
So I think what we're really talking a lot about is resilience, right? Resilience, as we think about left or right of boom, and that's resilience in the workforce, right? We've hinted a little bit at burnout and some of these the resilience there. Resilience in the environment, is how quickly can it bounce back? One of those actions, can you move the discussion from left of breach or right of breach from, all right, left of breach, what we do proactive, can I look at choke points? Can I look at attack surfaces? Can I do hardening in the environment? And then right of boom, are there response elements I can have that really are still left of business disruption, right? Because not if or when it happens, yes, but what happens and what it means to the business is really where I think a lot of risk discussions happening, resilience discussions are happening. That is, I think, exactly where cybersecurity as an industry, companies need to be thinking about more than what is a breach, how is a breach. It is. We've moved on from that conversation. I think a lot of the technology is enabling in that space around that I think is going to actually really change the dynamic of attacker-defender over time.
So I'll give you a little story before I ask my question. One client I was working with in a consultancy matter were a victim of a very sophisticated cyber-enabled fraud, which boiled down to, over a period of time, a member of the finance department making a payment, which she thought was legitimate, to one of their law firms, just saying. And they, in fact, it was someone masquerading as that law firm, but for a genuine payment. Now, that took quite a bit of all the technicalities of unscrambling of what had happened, but actually, we made the point of identifying that junior member of the finance department as a victim of a crime, as well as the company being a victim of the crime. And the CISO personally sat down with her and talked her through, once we'd understood the attack, why this had been a very sophisticated attack, what she should have been looking out for and to look out for in the future, and then treat her with that in mind, not as a potential malicious insider facilitating this fraud. The payback was 3 months later, a very similar crime was attempted, and she spotted it straight away. Different law firm, interestingly, but the same sort of premise within that. So my question to you is, if you've had an incident, do you treat your staff as victims of the crime and work with them empathetically, or do you consider it a disciplinary issue? Hands up for you treat them as a victim of a crime and treat them empathetically. And who would take disciplinary action and against them? So we're now getting into a just culture. Were their behaviours contrary to what we were expecting, or how we were doing it? And that really brings us on to, how do we create that culture? What's the policies, what's the guiding principles that we need to be doing to really generate that just culture that allows people to be cyber aware, but understand how to behave within that? So it's to the benefit of the company as a whole in what they're trying to achieve. Go on.
Me first?
Go on.
Go on. Ladies first. There's still some chivalry. So it's back to trust again. Is that it just doesn't work if people are frightened to report anything. So it's obviously back to education as well, is to make sure that people are given the tools to do the job, basically. So it's about induction training. It's about continually talking to people about new threats and all of those things. Is that most of the problems we have a person involved somewhere along the line, basically. So we just need to be able to equip them to do it. So it's education, it's training, it's all of those things. But at the end of the day, these people have got a job to do as well, and that they don't need the security lecture every month or whatever it is, that it's got to be embedded into their culture. And I think if you can embed it into other people's cultures as well, so that it's part of the induction process, it's not the security slot, sort of the half hour here. It's part of, I don't know, if you're working in retail, then it's part of how you do your till procedures. If you're working in oil and gas, it's part of their safety procedures. If you can embed it in the culture of the organisation, I think that's a really good way of attacking it, so that it's not the security bolt-on.
Marcus.
I mean, everything you said is spot on for culture. I mean, for me, it's communication and transparency, right? So communicating how you're doing, what you're doing, allowing them to be part of it. You mentioned how many, tax you get in any given quarter. Making those metrics known, right? And what you've done to breach them or to prevent them, and all those things are good. I think cybersecurity can't, again, not in the basement, I think it is about, and not the, lecture every month or every quarter, or even the gamified, cybersecurity, multiple choice, 8 questions, and you were able to read and answer, select out of 4. I think it needs to be richer than that in some way, right? And more inclusive and more transparent.
So one of the things that we do with all of our board members and executives is we give a third-party company their business email and their private email, and then allow them to go free to identify the cyber health of that individual. And that's massively impactful because, number one, the individual with the lowest health score, the worst, was the youngest of that group and was massively visible across social media. But at the same time, their score was driven more by family members and by exposed passwords from there. And I think it's bringing the story alive that this is not a scary bogeyman in the cupboard. There are things that we can do about it. And if we do that with the executive leaders, they then become the champions for this. The company will put security controls in place. 1.7 billion down to a couple of thousand of incidents every quarter. The controls are in place. Of those 2,500 incidents, we haven't been on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. We haven't been on the front page of the Financial Times. Is that because we're lucky, or is it because we're good? I think we're in the stage where we now have matured to a place where we know ourselves. I don't think we know our enemy, but we know ourselves better. So we know that from a technical perspective, we're good. What I think we really need to shift the dialogue is away from the people. Our people are our weakest link. If they are, who's at fault? Who is at fault? Is it them? No, it's me. It's me and my team who've not shifted awareness into understanding and then into behavioral shift and change. I want people not to ignore the potential fish. I want them to report it. So my security operations center can then extract all of those emails from across the 40,000 people within the environment. What I want to ensure is that any individual who understands the health and safety requirements actually also know the 5 key issues that I want them to behave from a cybersecurity perspective. So from my piece, the technical element is really important, and that's the piece that's in the background. That shouldn't be seen, really, by the colleagues, but they should absolutely understand and behave because they know how they can impact and affect the security of the organization, and in turn enable us to point to any client and say, you can trust Wood. You can trust Wood because their security program that combines the physical and the logical, that combines the people and the technical and the process, and we can actually prove it. That, to me, is the change in dialogue that we need to have.
I think after those very powerful words, it's now over to you because we've waffled on more than enough. So are there any questions? I spot a hand over there and then one over there as well.
Phil Murray, tech entrepreneur, male, pale and increasingly stale. The protagonists are narco and topiary. They're very different culture from the military. Is that one of the cultural issues we need to address?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was my point, that if you select in your own likeness, you will fail. And you'll fail because there is a linear thought process. It is absolutely the diversity of experience and skills and knowledge and background that creates a far stronger capability within an organization. And it crosses gender, it crosses neurodiversity, it crosses ethnicity, and it crosses absolutely the overuse of the military on this panel. Groupthink is the biggest hurdle that any organization has. We think we're good, but you're absolutely right. Our enemy does not think in that linear way. And if we think they do, we will be on the front page of the Wall Street Journal.
So I think the key is having a culture that allows assumptions to be challenged. Openly and honestly.
Can I add one point to that? Is that how many of you have taken security people, people from the business into the security team? Question. That's reasonable figure. I'd really like to encourage you to do that, because the more that you have people that are working in the business coming across into the security function, the more you're taking the culture of the business into your teams. They're people that you sort of semi-know anyway because you've been working with them, but they can also help to explain to the business, the issues that we're facing, and do it in business speak. So you can train them up incredibly quickly to be useful. It's quite easy to teach people sort of, risk management, security awareness, lots and lots of different functions are very, very transferable from the business. And that's a way of sort of embedding in the culture as well. And it's cheap, and you don't have to pay recruitment, and you don't have to pay recruitment charges either, so it's cost effective.
I'm conscious we've got other questions and time we've been wittering on. So there were some hands over here.
I've a question to you is, what do you think about things like bug bounties and things that turn the external actor into someone who's working on your side?
So let's unpick the concept of the enemy. That's the first question. So I am passionate about defending the people and the property and the data within my company. And anybody who is attempting to gain access, and for nefarious reasons, I'm going to find them and I am logically going to kill them. Is that a big enough and close enough and understanding of how I look at the attacker? They are my enemy. That said, I think that we are losing the campaign around the education. Again, great question this morning. How do we, as the white hats, actually engage the 7-year-old to take the path of supporting industry, government, the economy, as opposed to the massive rewards that an individual can earn by being a cyber black hat? I think we have to start an awful lot earlier. It can't be at university. It has to be at school. And actually, perhaps that's part of my role as a CISO of a large organization. I think the concept of the bug bounty actually is a maturity play. So if an organization is confident in their security, there's nothing quite as powerful as somebody saying, but what about this? So I think it's a maturity play. And I think organizations that are confident of their security should be questioning with the use of bug bounties. But I also think the second element is that we need to ensure that the pipeline to the bad actor, to the enemy, is reduced. Because I tell you what, they are not having the same challenge of identifying high-quality, capable individuals. And that's a challenge that only education can start. Eddie, does that get anywhere close?
Partly, I guess the question I was asking is, if you forget the enemy bit first and think about just external actors that could be your enemy and might not be, how do you turn them into your friend?
And I think that's the intelligence sharing, isn't it? Do we know our enemy? And I think I'm with Marcus. I think they shift and change so regularly. I'm not sure that we can actually nail down who those individuals are.
I think it also matters, like, what's their interaction with you once they found something, right? I mean, it's one thing to find something, another thing to steal data and say, I have it, right? I mean, that's a pretty good separation of enemy and friend in my world. I am a fan of bug bounty programs, especially ones that are sanctioned. If someone says, hey, come get it, we have a bug bounty program, come do this. We actually partner with HackerOne in helping them with some of their attack surface vulnerability stuff. So I think bug bounty programs are very good. But again, I think the fine line between the lulls or doing something bad and then claiming white hat, claiming, right, that they were there just to do a bug bounty, and those that are sanctioned or have parameters around them, and it shouldn't be a free for all just to show that you can do it. But I the value in it, because creativity, those people are some of the most creative because they're driven by the financial potential gain in a good way to find the vulnerabilities that are in your environment. But are you reading that to me in public, or are you doing a TikTok showing my data, behind me? I mean, that matters how that bug bounty relationship in terms of improving my defense rather than taking a shot at brand, I think comes off.
I'm really conscious. Once Amanda's spoken, we must close.
I think that what we should be trying to do is encourage those sort of people to come into the industry before they go down the dark side, basically. So it's great that they're finding vulnerabilities, because that's good. But what we need to do is, it's coming back to your point of, what do they do with it, and how are they treating the data. But if they're that good, we should be trying to get to them earlier and showing them we've got a great career for them.
Right, panel, thank you very much. Another fascinating conversation, all about human factors. I believe this story to be true. I can't verify it, but I understand that Elon Musk founded a school. And he founded a school just down the road from where he lives in California, and it was always thought to be the school he would send his kids. Indeed, he did. So someone went to take a look at it, assuming that this would be a coder's paradise, and that basically the kids would be on computers all the time generating code and doing all those things that we assume Elon Musk would think humans would be doing in the future. And it wasn't like that at all. This was one of those schools where all learning is done in teams. No learning was done individually. There's actually quite a high quotient of sport in the curriculum. And Musk's point was that number crunching is what the machines will do in the future. What we have to do is to continue to produce human beings. And it's producing the human beings that can get control and retain control of that he was particularly interested in. Very interested in the whole idea of how you constrain or give freedom to your employees. Because it strikes me there's a bit of a conundrum here, that when you're looking at, when Malcolm's looking at the whole of Wood Group, in many ways, what he wants to do is constrain people. He wants people to learn somewhat by rote to do the right thing. But when he's looking at his team, he essentially wants to develop a team of hunters who are just as proactive as the opposition that he's working against. It's something that the military has struggled with quite a long time, the duality between those two things. And how do you give freedom to people that need the freedom, but still give them the boundaries and the understanding of what you're trying to achieve so that they don't get it wrong, which is something we could talk about for a long time, but we won't. We'll go and have lunch now, which is provided for us by Celerity, so I'm sure it'll be really good.